Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. This is Politics Today, live on China's television. I'm Sean Kimale in Abuja. Some of the issues that is bothering a lot of people is the issue of security, and one will be wondering, why are these problems persisting? And of course, we'll touch on economic issues tonight on the program, so we get to it, everyone. First and foremost, of course, we are monitoring for you several stories happening almost at the same time across the country, which might be difficult for you to keep tabs on. We'll be bringing to you. Just don't forget that tomorrow, at least 6 judgments of the governorship race contests across the state are going to be determined by the Supreme Court. And China's television will be covering that for you. We'll be on the ground and the Supreme Court to give you every detail as you need to have them. But first and foremost, let's check out some of your political roundup stories.
The Supreme Court has affirmed the election of the Akwa Ibom State Governor, Umar Eno, as validly elected governor of the state, after dismissing the appeals of the 3 parties challenging the outcome of the election, which was held on March the 18th, 2023. This comes after the Apex Court panel, led by Justice Owani Abaji, dismissed the separate appeals of the All Progressives Congress, Young Progressives Party, and the New Nigeria People's Party, which are based on the allegations of WAEC certificate forgery. The Supreme Court has reserved judgment in the appeal filed by Oladipupo Adebutu, challenging the judgment of the Court of Appeal that affirmed the election of Dapo Abiodun as governor of Ogun State. Mr. Adebutu is asking the court to set aside the election because the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, had initially cancelled elections in 99 polling units and consequently ordered fresh elections be conducted in those polling units. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court will deliver judgment in the case of Lagos, Kano, Zamfara, Plateau, Ebonyi, Bauchi and Cross River governorship appeals on Friday, January the 12th, 2024. Justice Jude Onwe-Buze of the Federal Capital Territory High Court, Apo, has granted bail to Olu Agunoye, former Minister of Power and Steel, in the sum of 50 million naira. Moving the application, counsel to the former minister, Adeola Adedipe, prayed the court to grant bail to his client by way of self-recognizance or in liberal terms. The Progressives Governors Forum have pledged their unalloyed support for the federal government, with a promise to promote all policies initiated by the President Bola Tinubu-led administration, including the government's fight against corruption. Shortly after a meeting of the forum held behind closed doors in Abuja, the chairman of the forum and governor of Imo State, Mr. Hope Uzodimma, says the governors elected under the platform of the APC are united in their vision. Ahead of the Edo State governorship election, one of the aspirants under the platform of the All Progressives Congress, Mr. Anero Dekeri, is promising to create an enabling environment for improved quality election and industrial growth if voted as the governor of the state. At a news conference in Abuja, Mr. Dekeri notes that his administration will focus on the needs of the people, ensuring that all policies of governments align with the principles of fairness, justice, and equity. Mr. Dekeri believes that candidates should be chosen based on their capacity and integrity, not politics of turn by turn.
It's high time Nigeria begin to see beyond leadership of turn by turn. Because in my view, it breeds incompetence, and once an individual has a sense of entitlement.
Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives at the National Assembly, Mr. Ben Kallo, says the continuous sit-at-home order in some parts of the southeast is a setback to the region. Addressing a news conference in Bende, local government area of Abia State, he urges those disrupting peace in the region to sheathe their swords for the economic development of their region.
What we are proposing through PISP is that a non-kinetic approach, devoid of 100% militarization of the region.
A former special advisor, media and publicity to former President Muhammadu Buhari, Mr. Femi Adesina, is applauding the legacies of the former president as he describes him as one of the most misunderstood leaders in Nigeria. Mr. Adesina was saying this at a news conference in Abuja ahead of a book launch chronicling his working relationship with the former president. A member of the People's Democratic Party and campaign spokesperson of the PDP candidate in the 2023 presidential election, Mr. Daniel Bwala, was at the presidential villa where he met with President Bola Tinubu and pledged his total support for him. After the meeting with the president, Bola, who was a spokesperson for Atiku Abubakar in the 2023 presidential election, told State House correspondents that he came on the invitation of the president.
The only way we can come together and support the achievement of this objective, I think, is for us to give our best in supporting the administration. So I came to congratulate him.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us on the program. We need also to let you know that President Bola Tinubu has met with the governor of Rivers State, Siminalayi Fubara, at the State House today. After the meeting, which, of course, was held behind closed doors, the governor, when he was exiting the meeting room, did not say anything to journalists who were waiting to hear from him on the outcome of the discussion. Well, Lester, let's ask you again some of our question of the day for today's. This one seems a bit simple, which I think everybody should know. But the question of the day on the program tonight is, what is the minimum age required by the Constitution of Nigeria to contest for governor? Is it 40 years? Is it 35 years? Is it 45 years or 35 years? What is it? Is it 30 years, 45 years, 40 years, or 35 years? What is it? Well, keep your answers coming. Don't forget, incentives are coming. I promise. Yeah, it will come. What is the minimum age required by the Constitution of Nigeria to contest for governor? All right. Let's see if you get it right. But tonight, we'll be dissecting some major issues affecting this country. And on one hand is the state of the nation under the Bola Tinubu government, issues of security, a matter of policy decisions of this government, in the way and manner in which this country, the trajectory in which this country is going. We'll also go deep into the economy of Nigeria and the African continent. So stick around with me, everyone, because we're going to really be talking some very deep stuff. But first, the Christmas Eve attacks on several communities in at least 3 local government areas of Plateau State still leaves a lot of worry on the minds of many Nigerians, and at least the latest kidnappings and the Kaduna Expressway woes may have returned. The Inspector General of Police, Kadi Egbezokun, has ordered the deployment of police officers and security equipment to ensure the safety of travelers along the Abuja-Kaduna Expressway. Mr. Egbezokun also directed the Deputy IG Operations to ensure the strict monitoring of the security personnel assigned to the route, adding that the presence of the equipped operatives will act as a deterrent to criminal activities in the wake of all these issues. He hopes that this will arrest the situation and bring peace back. Well, in all of this, some Nigerians have renewed the call for state police and other measures that could give permanent solution to these issues. Tonight, I'm being joined by a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Falana, who joins us live from Lagos. Thank you so much, Mr. Falana, for joining us tonight on the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Yeah. The situation or the event on the eve of Christmas in Plateau State leaves a very sour taste in the mouth. And a lot of people will be wondering, where are we headed? How do we stop? How do we stop this kind of situation from happening again? And there are those who are calling again for state policing. Do you think that is a way to go? Are we supposed to expect a drastic decision from the federal government, from the president in this respect?
Well, as far as the Constitution is concerned, particularly Section 214, there shall be only one police force in Nigeria, the Nigerian police force. It is not a federal government police force, contrary to the general belief of Nigerians and governors. We do not have a federal government police force. We have a federation police force, which shall be jointly managed by the federal government and the state governments. Then Section 215 provides that the president will be in charge of law and order at the federal level, while the governors in the states will be in charge of law and order in the respective states. But what has happened over the years since 1999 is that state governments or state governors have abdicated their constitutional responsibility and handed over police powers in Nigeria to the president and the Inspector General of Police with profound respect. As far as the Constitution is concerned, if you go to the third schedule to the Constitution, there is a body known as the Nigerian Police Council, whose functions include the organization and administration of the Nigerian Police Force and the general supervision of the Nigerian Police Force. That body shall also advise the president with respect to the appointment of the Inspector General of Police. Who are the members of this body? The president only as the chairman of the body. The 36 state governors, the Inspector General of Police, and the chairman police council. In other words, in the 39-member council, Nigerian Police Council, governors number 36. So out of the 39 members, governors constitute 36 of the members. So in any meeting of that body, the governors can always insist on what should happen in their state. But what has happened is that this body does not meet unlike other federal executive bodies in Nigeria, created by Section 153 of the Constitution. We have even gone to court to compel regular meetings of this body so that policing can be taken very seriously, so that the security of Nigerians can be taken seriously. You expect, the Constitution expects the Nigerian Police Council to meet regularly like other federal bodies. Even the Nigerian Police, the Police Establishment Act of 2020 now provide that that body shall meet not less than twice a year. Since that law was made in 2020, the body has met only once to ratify the acting capacity, the acting appointment of the Inspector General of Police. So the point I'm making therefore is that we must go back to the Constitution. Some of the suggestions that have been made since the unfortunate incident in Plateau State are, for me, knee-jerk reactions. They have nothing to do with the Constitution. Even the idea of state police is, for me, diversionary. Why did the Constitution prohibit state police or police forces in Nigeria? It was because of the experience of our country, of our people under the colonial regime and in the First Republic, whereby political leaders in the regions subjected their opponents to horrendous violations of their human rights. And that was why it is said, no, we shouldn't go back to that dangerous era. Today, in spite of the challenges, today, not many Nigerians will expect some of this will allow state police because of the fear that they may be turned into instruments of oppression by governors who have used even the federal police to intimidate, demolish the building or the houses of their opponents, or even engage in extrajudicial killing in the states. Or those who use the police or thugs to rig elections cannot be asked to manage state police. Therefore, we should stop the diversionary suggestion that the answer to the crisis in the country is state police. What is the solution provided by the Constitution? It is to have a police force that is adequately equipped. As a matter of fact, in 2019, we had the Police Equipment Fund Act to make provision for the training, adequate training of police personnel in Nigeria. can provide state-of-the-art security. That is the language of the law. But what has happened? And to fund that body, to fund the police, 0.5% of the money in the federation account will be deployed and other funds. So what has happened since 2019?
Falana.
The money meant to equip the police,
the
money meant to train the police is diverted. And those are the issues we should address. How do you adequately fund the police so that they will have operational vehicles, they will have adequate training, they will have security guidance to address security challenges?
So, Mr. Falana, if I may jump in quickly. So you look at it, and interestingly, you are a member at the Confab 2014, and there were far-reaching recommendations made. And there are those who say those recommendations will help our nation move forward. In fact, the likes of AfCFTA are now asking that the Tinubu-led federal government should now start dusting up the Confab report to implement it their own way of restructuring Nigeria. In that document, do you think there are propositions on how to resolve the insecurity situation in the country?
So the most important recommendation of that body in 2014 was, the most important recommendation was and is the provision for the justiciability of the socio-economic rights of our people, the fundamental objectives. And I'm talking of the right to employment, the right to health, the right to education, and so on and so forth. Social services. That body provides that every Nigerian should be empowered to go to court if these rights are violated by the government. Because you can't talk of physical security without talking of social security. There are countries now, particularly Scandinavian countries, that are closing down their prisons because young people are no longer going to prison. The state has taken care of their welfare. In the case of Nigeria, it's provided there in Section 14 of the Constitution that the security and welfare of Nigerians shall be the primary purpose of government. The point I'm making, therefore, is that the government of the day must quickly address the challenges of security, the challenges of welfare of our people. And I'm suggesting that as a matter of urgency, the president should call a meeting of the Nigerian Police Council so that the question of policy in the entire country can be addressed as provided by the Constitution.
So, Mr. Falana, if you go to Section 216 that you referenced, Mr. Falana, quickly, you mentioned that the 0.5% that is supposed to be that's meant for the equipping of the Nigerian police on one hand, which we don't know whether or not that, we don't know when last that has been obeyed. The Section 216, which I'd like to show a lot of Nigerians, which you reference, the fundamental role of the police, Nigeria Police Council. If this has been in breach and it has not been followed, because if there are laws and it's not being followed, the law is useless, isn't it?
I agree with you. What I'm saying is that we have the Nigerian police force that is meant to address the issue of law and order in all parts of Nigeria. In fact, Section 216 of the Constitution provides that the president cannot remove or appoint an Inspector General of Police without consulting the Nigerian Police Council. It is that body that shall be in charge of the Nigerian police force. But what has happened? What has happened is that it is the federal government alone that is managing, organizing, and supervising the Nigerian police force. I am challenging our governors who are throwing up their hands in helplessness to take advantage of the provisions of the Constitution, to insist on the regular meetings of the Nigerian Police Council, so that security challenge in every part of the country can be discussed by that body. The number of police personnel to serve in every state should be decided by that body. But right now, I mean, there was even a time the Office of the Inspector General of Police and the Nigerian Police Council were fighting over how many police personnel should be employed. No, that is the duty of the Nigerian Police Council to decide how many police personnel will be needed in every state in Nigeria and the funding to be addressed. So I'm saying, for now, please let us go back to the drawing table and take security of Nigeria very seriously, as provided by the Constitution. Then the Police Equipment Fund Act, our governors again must show interest because 0.5% of money from the Federation account and other sources are put together to fund the police, to train the police, to equip the police. Now, this money with profound respect, it's not being deployed to train police personnel in Nigeria. It's not being deployed to equip the police or to rebuild their barracks. So from today, let all agencies of the government, let all public officers empowered by the Constitution to exercise police powers in our country take their job very seriously, so that the question of insecurity in our country will be a thing of the past as soon as possible.
Yeah, Mr. Falana, there are those who argue that, look, intelligence as being the vulnerable leg in policing in Nigeria, and those who will say, if you compare the United States and in some other climes where you have the sheriffs and the local police that are very close, under 5 minutes the deployment is there. You go into some police stations in some local government, in some communities, in some deep rural part of this country, you find just maybe 1 or 2 police officers, and in fact the ratio of police officers to the citizen is very abysmal. But I mean, if we go on and on about this policing issue, one will wonder where we are headed. But I mean, you've laid some fundamental issues. But I would like you to comment on the recent decision of the federal government. And I know, and I've reminded Nigerians, that the Bola Tinubu government did not do it first. That is a slashing of the delegation of the federal government in travels. That the cost, the federal government under Bola Tinubu says 60% in the cost. The Buhari government in 2019, August, also did the same thing. But from your own point of view, is this cosmetic or is it realistic?
Well, it is realistic. And if possible, the government can still go further and reduce the number from 60 to 40% or thereabout, having regards to the state of the economy. But there are areas to address. There are areas to address where we are wasting a lot of resources. I once traveled and I was in one of the embassies and I was flabbergasted to learn that Nigeria has been paying rents in an African country, paying rents for our embassy since 1962. So that shouldn't be so. So the government will have to look holistically at the areas of waste. Yes, that's a good initiative on the part of the president. Our governors must also reduce their entourage locally and internationally so that we can let the world know and let Nigerians know that the question of sacrifice will have to start from the top. For years, we have asked the poor to tighten their bets. It is the government now that should tighten their bet. The budget must be reviewed to reflect the state of the economy. And for me, but we are starting now. We are starting now to begin to cut down excesses of government. And for me, I think it's a good development.
If you look at it,
but we need to go far. Yeah. We need to go much more.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of these issues, and I've been one of the advocates of those who say we need to look inwards. In fact, I had a conversation with the former governor of Kano State about the manner in which governors and some other officials of government comport themselves or the way they live, the kind of luxury that you find government officials. And in fact, sometimes they throw in the faces of the masses. You see them with long convoys. You see one personnel with 5-6 vehicles in the front, 5-6 vehicles on the back. In fact, there are those who believe that the National Assembly is overbloated. We do not need that kind of enormous number of those representing us in Abuja, because if we are serious, we need to look at what the nation ends vis-a-vis our people's needs and the poverty in the land. If 130-something million people are multidimensionally poor and our government officials, lawmakers are living in luxury in Abuja, does it make sense? So the big question here, Mr. Falana, is that it's not only the federal government, also in the state, but where do we start from for citizens to hold government officials accountable?
Well, I think, again, we have to start from the top. If you look at the budget this year, 2024, we need to review the budget. Whereas the president sent the budget to the National Assembly, it was jacked up, to the tune of about 1.2 trillion naira. You can only do that if a country is, swimming in resources. But for a country that is poor, we need to look at the budget. But it's not enough to talk about the budget at the national level. We must also take the budget of each state in the country, each local government in the country, and be able to ensure that we monitor and hold the government accountable. The media must lead the campaign in this regard. And of course, CSOs, should also go out there and mobilize our people so that they begin to ask questions from those who are governing the country, and then Nigerians must demand for their rights under the law, particularly the socioeconomic rights of our people. We can no longer take the excuse. In fact, it's almost a shame that we have about 133 million people that are said to be dimensionally poor. That number must go. We have no business with poverty. So I believe we have enough resources in our country, if they are mobilized, human and natural, that can make this country one of the richest, one of the most prosperous in the world.
All right. So, that is perhaps one last question, Mr. Falana, that I'd like you to deal with. The activities of President Bola Tinubu in the area of fighting corruption. There is the special investigator that he raised over the CBN, and some of the findings, although, they leaked and came out, maybe not official yet, but they're mind-boggling about what was going on in the CBN. And recently, some of the decisions of the president earlier this year, one would think maybe Bola Tinubu is doing the right thing in terms of gaining the confidence of the Nigerian people. Do you think so?
Well, for me, in fighting corruption, there isn't much to expect from the government. In fighting corruption anywhere in the world, it is the duty of the people, led by the media, to expose corruption in this country. Before the EFCC and ICPC and the rest of them were established, corruption was fought in Nigeria, particularly in the 70s under the Yakubu Gowon regime, when it was a case of, if you dabble me, I attack you. All you needed to do then was, if you had the information, you go to a court to file an affidavit alleging corruption on the part of certain officials. And from there, the press will pick it up and feast on it until the officer involved call it quits with the government. We must go back to that era. Everywhere in the world, governments are all about secrecy. They keep records. They don't want people to know what is going on. But I think in the case of Nigeria, we have enough laws now to expose corruption, to fight corruption. It is the duty of Nigerians to bring out the information. It is the duty of the media to expose corruption. And then we expect the government to react. And that is what is going on already under the Bola Tinubu administration. Nigerians are coming out with facts and figures. Nigerians are feeding the government with information, and the government is expected to act. And if the government will not act, the people can be mobilized to compel the government to act, either by going to court or going to the street.
Right.
This country cannot afford to continue in the old ways. It can no longer be business as usual. And that is the message Nigerians are passing across to the company.
Thank you so much, Mr. Falana. I really appreciate your time tonight. I understand that you and some of your colleagues may be planning a mega political party. I don't know how far your involvement in that. If that's true.
We're planning a revolutionary party, not a mega party, a revolutionary party that will put the question of ideology, socialism in the front burner.
I wish you the very best. We look forward to that. Maybe some of those who will join are listening to you tonight. Do you have a name for it? Is it Falana Revolutionary Party, or what would you call it?
No. I'm just going to be a member. Okay. Unlike bourgeois parties, we do not decide the name, before the party is born.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We're going to break, everyone. But when we return, another eminent Nigerian that will be joining me is a former Deputy Governor of the CBN, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, who will be sharing insight in some very deep stuff in economy-wise. Stay with us, everyone. Standing by to join us. We'll be right back after this break, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's now switch gears now and speak about issues relating to the economy. Well, of course, the Central Bank of Nigeria, dissolved the board of 3 banks, has now appointed new executives to oversee the affairs of these 3 banks, which boards were dissolved. The CBN said the action was necessary due to the non-compliance of these banks and their respective boards with the provisions of Section 12C, F, G, H of Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020. The activities of Mr. Obaze, the appointed CBN special investigator in July of last year by President Bola Tinubu, which alleged that Emefiele, the former governor of the CBN, used proxies to set up 2 financial institutions, was also another issue raising a lot of concerns in the health of the banking sector in Nigeria. Of course, some of these issues are getting a lot of Nigerians talking about. Tonight, we'll be talking about regional economy, private sector, a lot of elections on the continent. What this means, Nigeria is a major player. If it needs to stay as a major player, what can be done in terms of regional economy? Of course, tonight, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, a former deputy governor of the Central Bank, is now the chairman of the board of directors and advisory board of the Africa Private Sector Summit, a Pan-African private sector-led organization which has its headquarters in Accra, Ghana. He joins us live. Thank you so much virtually. Thank you so much indeed, Prof, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for having me.
For those who have followed the CBN and its activities over the last 8 years or more, and knowing that someone like you will be talking to us tonight on the program, are worried about what is going on in the CBN. Are you worried as well? And because some of the things that we are hearing doesn't give the kind of confidence that you should be having in the Apex Bank on one hand, and you are hearing about some of these issues in relation to commercial banks. Looks like deja vu in the years past where commercial banks and some of these unscrupulous activities happen and there are problems in the banking sector.
Well, Sharon, thank you. First of all, let me be very clear. It is not my impression that I'm here to speak about the Central Bank of Nigeria. I am the chairman of the Africa Private Sector Summit. And, when I was invited, we talked about the business environment in Africa and intra-African trade. So I want to be very clear. I don't want to get into political commentary about, Nigerian institutions, including the central bank. Having said that, the only thing I can say about the central bank or what the central bank has done in the last few hours in terms of, sacking the boards of the banks. Of course, the central bank has the powers to do that if it judges that the banks in question are not being well run, they're a threat to financial stability, or that they're not meeting the conditions under which their banking licenses were granted to them. As you know, the banking sector all over the world is about the most regulated business sector on the planet. And that's because banks trade and thrive on other people's money. 80 to 90% of the money with which banks do business is depositors' funds. Only very little is shareholders' funds. So it's a very different model of business, because it sort of depends on the consumer who puts his money in the bank in trust that he or she will find that money when they go there. So that's why banks are very heavily regulated. And specifically on this particular action, I cannot speak to the merits, but I can tell you that the central bank certainly has the authority, the powers to do that. We did it in our time at the central bank for very good reasons too. So that's what I would say. Now, what I find a bit odd, is the context in which this is happening. Because you have to understand that the central bank has to be independent. It has to be professional. And the bank itself has the resources, the authority to be able to investigate any deposit money bank in Nigeria and find out if there are infractions, and if so, take the necessary decisions. But this now seems to be happening from an external stimulus. And that's what is a bit odd about it, that the central bank is now sort of in a position where it would appear, it could be just an appearance, I don't know, that it's, regulatory decisions are being dictated by some outside influence or force or entity. I find that a little bit odd because, like I say, central banks have done this in Nigeria time and time again. And it's not a new thing at all, but they did it independently. I mean, in the normal exercise of their banking supervision and regulatory powers.
It's interesting, and and I raised this. Yes, our conversation is centered around the prosperity of the African nation, especially in a very crucial election year. At least 15 countries in Africa, out of the over 1 billion population, will be going into election this year. It means a lot. The fortunes, the prosperity, and how the private sector runs in this whole climate is very key. But yeah, I can't have Kingsley Moghalu, a former deputy governor of the central bank, and we have this kind of mess going on in Nigeria and not talk about the CBN. It's going to be some kind of anomaly. But thank you so much for your commentary on that. But let's talk about the African continent, the prosperity of this nation, of this continent. Now, 15 African countries at least will be having elections this year. And so one will wonder, what about the African Free Trade Agreement, which about 47 countries are signatory to? Is it working? What is the propriety of it? What are the kind of trade? Nigeria is supposed to be playing a major role. From your organization's point of view, you have your projections, you have your reservations. What are those?
Well, thank you. The Africa Private Sector Summit, which is a continent-wide, private sector-led organization that I happen to be the chairman of its board of directors and executive board, is concerned with the promotion of an enabling business environment for trade and investment in Africa, and specifically intra-African trade, which is the subject of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA. So the chief obstacle to this is that, yes, 47 African countries have ratified the treaty, very spectacular for an African international law. But you cannot make the free trade agreement work on the ground if the normal businessman or woman, the SME that is trading and trying to trade across the border with Ghana or with Togo or with Ivory Coast and so on, or Niger or Benin Republic, if these businesses, in addition to the big corporates, if they cannot do business effectively, if the business environment stops them from creating wealth for Africans, then that treaty will then be just some theoretical law, but there's a potential that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement can create an additional GDP of almost $500 billion, by 2035, and take about 30 million Africans out of poverty. For this to happen, we have to have an enabling business environment in African countries and between African countries. So the APSS, we are mounting a campaign for all African countries, heads of states and governments, to sign at the African Union Summit in 2025 a charter on, a private sector Bill of Rights with 24 specific guarantees for businesses in African countries. If African leaders can do this, it will help a lot the economies of our countries in the continent. As you rightly said, this year, 2024, is the year of elections. There will be about 50 elections around the world in about 50 countries this year. And about 15 of them are in African countries, from Ghana to South Africa and so many others. And, if people who are aspiring to lead African countries do not understand the role of the private sector in creating wealth for the citizens of their countries, if they don't understand that the private sector has to work and that the business environment has to be an enabling one, then they don't know what their job is. And you wonder what they're aspiring to do in office. So that's what we are saying.
So you look at it, there are efforts that are being made by, you see the efforts made in Rwanda, but the one that has been more drastic and more progressive, some leaders on the continent will say, is that what President Ruto did in Kenya, the proposition of a borderless continent, where the Kenya is proposing a visa-less travel into that country. So there are a lot of people who say there are issues though, but then that is a first move. For Nigeria and within the West African region, a visa-free travel to Kenya across the globe. What does that portend for trade?
Great things if it is actually implemented. Among the 24 specific rights we are asking African leaders to sign on to and to implement in practice is the right to visa-free travel across the continent. We are also requesting African leaders to understand that the private sector needs to be guaranteed the right to a secure and stable environment. So security is number one. Without an environment that is secure and stable, businesses will not be able to thrive. So you have the situations we have, for example, inside Nigeria, in the Middle Belt, where people are being killed in hundreds, in the northeast, in some parts of the southeast, and so on and so forth. These are very, very disabling situations for people to do business. So the right to security, the right to visa-free travel, the right to a legal system where contracts are, sanctified and cannot be, just treated anyhow. The right to efficient importation and ports administration, the right to infrastructure, the right to an educational system that creates the skills that the private sector needs in our continent of Africa to create and drive the fourth industrial revolution. The right of private sector companies to be consulted when laws and regulations are being made. This is very important. Many times our governments have people who don't understand the private sector, and yet they make laws for the economy that impact the private sector, and this turns out sometimes negative. But if you have a consultative relationship with the private sector, this will go better.
Yeah, locally here in Nigeria, although the borders in Nigeria, there are those who would describe it as a most porous one. Is this something that the Nigerian government can consider a visa-free to countries on the continent, first and foremost?
Listen, when you say visa-free, it doesn't mean that you just leave your borders porous. You still have to manage your borders. Every country does that. But the challenge is with the administration, of immigration. Rwanda has done something like that. I think Kenya is doing that. and you make that rule in favor, especially of people who are coming for business and investment purposes, but you still monitor them and you still enforce your laws. The problem with Nigeria's borders is not whether or not it's visa-free. It's about whether actually we have borders in 80% of Nigeria's exposures to neighboring countries. Are those borders actually manned? Are they being, effectively policed and administered? Is there proper security checks? That's the real issue. Nigeria is a major driver of ECOWAS economy. At least 60% of ECOWAS GDP is Nigeria. So you have to make it, actually work in practice, that people can trade across borders. Why is this very important? I want to say why intra-African trade is really very important and needs to be supported by enabling business environments by governments. The reason is because Africa is the poorest, is the continent in the world today that has the highest rates of poverty still. If you look at our trade patterns, we trade a lot with other countries outside of the African continent. So we engage a lot in global trade, but are we competitive in global trade? No, we're not competitive because more than 60% of global trade is in manufactured and value-added products. And that's not what we are exporting from Africa. We're exporting, natural resources in their raw form. We're exporting agricultural commodities. These things make up less than 10 to 20% of global trade. So global trade is structurally arranged not to be in favor of Africa. Meanwhile, 70% of all trade by European countries is within Europe. 60% of all trade by Asian countries is inside Asia. 30 to 40% of all trade by North American countries is in that region. In Africa, only 14% of our trade is within our own country.
So Professor Moghalu, if I may jump in, right? Nigeria is a major player. For what you know about the Nigerian economy and our area of comparative advantage on the continent and, in fact, in the sub-region, what products do you think that we can leverage on? I mean, if you are a major player, in terms of production that we can export, what would be the product of comparative advantage?
I was saying before you interrupted me that the path to prosperity for Africa lies through intra-African trade. Now to your question about Nigeria. Nigeria has many advantages, but we have to fix the business environment first. And if we don't fix the business environment, we are not going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. The first thing about the Nigerian business environment is the problem of electricity, because that goes to productivity. If you have reliable electricity, then you can be a productive economy, then you can export goods that are manufactured in Nigeria across the African continent. So we have advantages in the areas of agriculture. We can process agricultural products, add value to them, and trade across our borders. We have advantages in the area of services. The services economy is growing very big in Nigeria, and we can export our services. And not just even in Africa, but around the world. People can sit inside Nigeria and perform IT and other technological services and earn a lot of money, a lot of forex, because their wages will be less than people, say, in London or in New York. So you use the fact of lower wages to your advantage, which China used to rise economically. And now some investment is going out of China into cheaper places like Vietnam, like Bangladesh, and so on. So these are the ways in which we can proceed. We no longer talk about comparative advantage in modern economics. That's an archaic concept. We talk about competitive advantage. That is what drives global trade, the ability to use products that may not even be indigenous to your locality, to manufacture things that are valuable at good cost and export them. After all the manufacturers that we're getting from the Western world, are the raw materials in the West? No, the raw materials are here in our continent. Yet, because they have competitive advantage, they turn those raw materials into products and sell to us. They get rich while we get poor.
A lot of lessons to take away. And I look at it. In fact, some countries in Africa are having problems because they are heavily indebted to countries in Asia and in Europe and America as well. You look at it from 2010 to 2022, the percentage of GDP, Africa's share of external debt has risen astronomically. It's risen from about 19% in 2010 to about 29% in 2022, and it's gone even higher in the last year. By December, I'm not sure what figure that has stood at. And you look at it, infrastructure is a major problem to be able to drive the economy. And there are those who say most of these debts are in dollars. America can decide to write its own debt off because it's in their own currency. Where can Africa, or how can Africa survive in the face of this external debt to the GDP ratio?
That's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, Sheryl, but that's because of very weak economic management in African countries. That's why we borrow so much. It's not that debt is bad, but why do we borrow? How do we borrow? And what do we borrow for? As a general principle, you have to borrow only if it's absolutely necessary, if it's the best course of action, and for productive purposes. You have to do a calculation of what the investment of the debt funds in, how they will actually drive up the GDP of the country, how they will, be sustainable for repayment. That's how you borrow and why you borrow. We also borrow a lot because we don't understand the role of the state in managing the economy. A lot of the infrastructures we borrow for or claim to borrow for can be done as PPP arrangements with private countries, with private companies. But many African countries don't do this. They like to go around saying they're looking for money. Meanwhile, they're being so wasteful inside their own country. And people will lend you money because it's their business to lend you money. They make money by lending you money. That's their own business plan. So if, as a country, an African country does not keep its debt very manageable, then this is quite catastrophic and doesn't leave you with any oxygen, doesn't leave you with room to breathe, But that's because many of them are not following the right models. And there's a lot of corruption, of course. We know that. It goes on in many countries. So, Africa's debt sustainability, if we want to speak specifically about Nigeria, where we are spending almost 100% of our revenues paying debt, and our oil revenues are increasingly being pawned for more borrowings. We're pawning our future oil revenues for debt. Right. I find this a very, very problematic approach. And I think we need to be a little bit more original in our thinking. And there's a lot more we can do much better.
Professor Kingsley Moghalu, looks so much like a professorial conversation tonight with you on the regional economy, Africa trade, regional economy and all of that. A former deputy governor of the Central Bank, who is now the chair of the board of directors and advisory board of the Africa Private Sector Summit, a private sector-led organization which is based in Accra, Ghana, which promotes trade and investment on the continent. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time tonight on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. So before we go, let's tell you that there was a meeting between President Bola Tinubu and the governor of Rivers State, Siminalayi Fubara, at the presidential villa. Mr. Fubara arrived at the presidential villa at about 5:40 p.m. this evening and went straight to the office of the president, where they met behind closed doors. The reason for the visit has not been disclosed. After the meeting, this is the very first meeting of Governor Fubara to the presidential villa since the signing of the 8-point agreement reached after President Tinubu weighed into the controversy between him and the Minister of FCT in some weekend. All right, just before we go, some of you who are tweeting to me now, I see that you're getting some gotten wrong and some gotten right. The question of the day, which is, what is the minimum age required by the Constitution of Nigeria to contest for governor? And these options are there: 40 years, 35, 45 years, or 30 years. But the correct answer is 35 years. Yes, so you know. Well, I'll keep my incentive until I'm able to give it out. Don't worry, it will come, I promise you. But that's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm sure I'll see you tomorrow again. God willing. Bye-bye.